was, which is one of the reasons why I now have a cart that I move the groceries into the house with. I was unbalanced and my walkway is uneven, and I took a step and I knew I was going over, and I went, I hope the eggs are not in here.
Yeah.
I landed on the grass, which was, fine, but that really scared me.
Yeah.
And so at that point you're going, okay, if you don't want to make 5 trips out to the car for the groceries, then get yourself a cart and bring them all in a cart. And then you've got something to hold on to.
This is Donna. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
For some reason, my phone won't let my video come on. It says I'm in a safe driving mode.
Oh.
I don't know how to turn it off.
There's probably a place in your...
Hello?
If you're on your phone, Donna, you need to go into your settings.
Yeah, the settings.
To hear you all.
You might be on the airplane mode or something.
No, it's not on airplane mode. That's correct. But there's got to be something else. Because it just says...
That'll do weird stuff.
She's underwater.
Safe driving mode.
No.
Oh my gosh. I could be, but it's good to hear from everybody. I'm doing good. And we're in the mountain right now. We're hoping to come back probably next week.
Okay.
If not a little sooner. And
it'll be good to have you back.
And it's, yeah, I had to miss last week because I had to go see my son. And so I'm on to watch it, or it wasn't Sunday.
Well, of course, everything's now on YouTube or on the church website, so you can catch us later.
Okay, I will do it. I promise you.
Good. Good. Tony, I threw you the right to record.
Yep, I got it, and we're recording. So I'm gonna work on some other things while I listen to y'all. But thanks for everybody for being here, and Kathleen for pulling this all together.
Okay. Well, I'm going to get started. I'll look to see if anybody comes in. Let's do. Let me do escape. I gotta make sure I get all of this done right, because it's not always easy. There we go.
Oh, mute. Sorry, I forgot to mute.
So we're gonna do. Gonna go from coast to coast this week. I'm gonna end up in Lynn's area of the world. But I'm going to start first with here's your little lesson for the day. When we talk about geography, the National Geographic says that you should teach about 5 things. One is location, and location. And that can be specific or relative. And if you think about location in terms of your house, I think most of you know you have a zip code +4. And if somebody just wrote that zip code +4 on an envelope and stuck it in the mail, it would come to your house. It is that specific. But if you say, I live off of 17 bypass, that's relative. We look at how places interact with the environment. Around here, you would look about, how we deal with hurricanes and high tides and river flooding, and do we change how we change the environment, how the environment changes us. We look at movement. We look at how ideas and people move into and out of an area. We look at a region. We're part of the Low Country here. We're part of the South Carolina. We're part of the South, the coastal region. There's lots of things in region. And then we look at place. And I love looking at place. Place is something that makes where you are unique. And if you think about it in terms, there's two ways of thinking about it. One, if you were going to do a television show from, let's say, the Grand Strand, but you don't want to film here. I don't know if any of you ever watch Hallmark movies. Hallmark movies are almost always filmed in Vancouver. They're filmed in Canada, but their opening credits tell you where the story supposedly takes place. They do a skyline so you know, oh, I'm in Seattle, or I'm in Washington, or I'm in New York, or I'm in some place special. So if I were going to do a television show set on the Grand Strand, I might certainly do the beach, some sort of aerial up the beach, the sky wheel, a golf course maybe. So, what are the things that make it unique? And if you think about towns where you've lived, if you fell asleep and were driving in a car and woke up and you saw something, how would you know exactly where you are? And so some place can be natural, like the Horseshoe Falls. It can be man-made, like the Golden Gate Bridge or the Sydney Opera House. I mean, if you saw a television show and the opening showed you the Golden Gate Bridge, you'd go, oh, this is in San Francisco. And signs are also, there's some places, there are a lot of things in our world that are generic. McDonald's is McDonald's is McDonald's. Home Depot. Home Depot in Massachusetts looks identical to a Home Depot in Colorado or Florida. They're all the same. It used to be with malls. You could walk into a mall and I could tell you what stores were in there. In the days that there was a Tom McCann's. Remember Tom McCann's? There would be a Tom McCann's. There would be a candy shop. There would be, you'd have Sears, you'd have Penny's. They were all sort of the same, identical. And if you saw this sign, if I saw this sign, I would know I was on 501 between Conway and Florence. And if I were coming in the other way, and I thought about going out and taking a picture of it, there's the Pirate Adventure billboards. My cousin's grandchildren count them on the way in, or try to count them on the way in, and they get up to about 50 and then they lose count. You hope your grandchildren are sleeping before they see these signs. But if you saw this sign, you'd know I'm on 95, know exactly where you are. If you go to the Midwest, Walled drugstore, you're going to see where you are. And if you're in California, in the San Francisco area, you might see a lot of signs like this. And if you take 808 South and exit at Stevens Creek, you're going to pull up in front of this house. And you're going to go, wow, this is a pretty fancy Victorian house. This is, pretty well, somebody wealthy lived here. But why are they calling it a mystery house? So your tour guide, when you go in and pay your money and go in, is going to say, this is a real mystery house. Ghosts and demons and all sorts of things are here, including 160 rooms, 40 bedrooms, 2 ballrooms, 2 basements, 47 fireplaces, but only 17 chimneys, 5 kitchens, 40 staircases, some like the one in the picture which go nowhere, 50 skylights, some of which are not on a floor, 2,000 oddly shaped cupboards, one is as small as an inch deep, 10,000 windows, 950 doors, 3 elevators, and 1 shower. Okay, well, that's a little odd. There's even a door that if you step out, that's a pretty long step down. Okay, so here you have the door, but where are you going to go? This is the house from the air. All that you see here is one house. Maybe the mystery is, why did it get built this way? And so in order to answer some of these questions, oh, by the way, supposedly the woman who designed this house every night went into this room and held seances, and the ghost told her what had to be built the next day. And she would come out of this room with sketches and notes on pieces of paper and give it to the workmen who were working in her house, supposedly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, year after year after year. Was she afraid was it so big so that the ghosts that wanted to kill her couldn't find her? Was it so big that she was just driven by these ghosts? We don't really know. But I want to introduce you to Sarah Winchester and her never-ending house, because this is the Winchester house in California. Now, Sarah, that's one of the few pictures we have of Sarah. Sarah was born in 1839 in New Haven, Connecticut. So we have to start in the East Coast. And her family ends up being fairly comfortable financially. She's the fifth of 7 children. There's one son and a lot of daughters. Her parents supported abolitionists and free thinking. And when her father was a joiner, and a joiner made fine furniture. And when she was born, her father was sort of struggling, and they actually lived in an apartment while he did some other odd jobs around town. He supervised a bathhouse. But as in the 1840s continue, there's more and more demand for this fine furniture. Into the 1850s, even more. And the family does very well. I would classify them as kind of upper middle class for New Haven at that time. They lived in a pretty posh neighborhood. Their house fronted on one of the main streets, the good address. So if you went out her front door, you were on this street, which was filled with really big houses of upper middle class and upper class people of New Haven. If you went out the back door, you crossed the ground and you went into the shop where her father and his workers made the furniture. So the house is between two worlds. As I said, she was born in 1839. She is very well educated. She was encouraged to learn. She spoke 4 languages other than English. She composed music. She was well versed in the classics such as Homer and Shakespeare. And what was extremely unusual for the time, she was very good in math and science. This is the 1850s. She went to a young ladies' collegiate institute, which was associated with Yale. Now, I could have done more research on this and I just didn't follow up on it, but it's one of the questions. Yale, of course, in the 1840s and 50s was males only, as was Brown, as was Harvard. Pembroke started with Brown. Harvard had Radcliffe. I don't know if its institute that she attended, was like a Radcliffe or a Pembroke, but I do know it was an advanced education, and they were not just teaching them how to make tea and manners. As an adult, she is only 4'10" tall. She is tiny, probably never weighed more than 95 pounds. She was known as the Belle of New Haven. She was considered to be very attractive. When she was 22, 23, she marries William Winchester. He's another resident of New Haven. Their families had lived next door to each other for one point in their lives. So she probably knew him from the time they were children. Their families attended the same church. Chances are her family went more than his family did. And she went to school with William's sister. And from everything we can tell, this is a real love match. Now notice that they're married in 1862. The Civil War is going on. her family would be, and his family were both very strong supporters of getting rid of slavery. They would be for the Union, and yet William didn't go to war. We don't know why. There are three possible reasons. One, he's the only son of the family, and he's expected to run with his father, run the family businesses. Two, he may have had some health issues. Three, they were wealthy enough that he could pay the $300 to have somebody go in his place, because that was very common at that during the Civil War. You paid someone to take your place. Her father-in-law was Oliver Winchester, and Oliver was a really fascinating man. He starts out as a shirt maker, and eventually he has a factory. It's the Winchester and Davies shirt manufacturers in New Haven. Mr. Davies was a seller of shirts. Oliver Winchester made shirts, and he patented a new way of putting shirts together so they fitted better. It had to do with how the shoulder seams were cut and sewn. Now, when he goes into the business of making shirts, he has a building where the men cut the material and where the shirts are ironed. But the sewing of the shirts, which was done in the 1840s by hand, was done in homes. The shirts went out to women in homes and then came back and were finished off in the factory. But Oliver Winchester in the early 1850s invests in this newfangled machine called a sewing machine. And by the time this couple is married, he has a factory, this 5-story factory in New Haven, which employs more than 2,000 workers, most of which were Irish immigrants. This factory worked 6 days a week. One floor was just for ironing, one floor was just for sewing, one floor for cutting material, for storing. And what was interesting is he continued to have piecework done at home in women's homes. But if you sewed the shirts at home, you got $3 a week. If you came into the factory and worked at the sewing machine, you got $4 a week. So he is a huge employer, and he is making, by the time this young couple gets married and young William is taking over more and more control in the factory, working with his father, it is a $1 million business. They're making money hand over fist. And he has enough money, Oliver Winchester has enough money that he can invest in other things. Now, the couple moves in with their in-laws, 1862, can't get somebody to build houses, it's the middle of the war. In 1866, they have their first child. Her name is Annie. So they've been married for 4 years. They have this daughter, Annie. She dies when she is 6 weeks old. She died of malnutrition. She had a genetic condition which prohibited her from absorbing nutrients from any of her food. And basically she starves to death. And this is devastating for this couple, absolutely devastating. And they never had another child. This was the only child that they had. And I have to wonder how this weighed on Sarah, how Sarah would feel about this. So her father-in-law, about the same time that Sarah is pregnant and Annie is born and dies, Oliver buys a gun factory. Mr. Smith and Mr. Wesson had a factory which wasn't doing very well, so he bought it. There are some shenanigans back and forth of, getting control. But he starts off, the fact that the factory was making repeating pistols. And he eventually figures out a way to make it as a repeating rifle. And this is going to take this family, which was wealthy, to being very wealthy. Now, Sarah and William continue to live with their his parents, but as they become very wealthy, they need a bigger and better house. This is the only picture we have of what was Winchester House in New Haven, Connecticut. And what we do know is this house was built after Annie died, and William and Sarah together did a lot of the design for this. William, if he wasn't the heir to this shirt factory and this gun factory, might very well have been an architect. He was very interested in architecture. And together they planned this house, they worked with the builders, and this house was up on this hill and it looked down over the factory, so Oliver Winchester could see what his factory was doing every day. This was the house that was built across the street. It's a little less fancy. It does exist today, but it's fairly typical of the Victorian era. This happens to be an Italianate style, and it was built about the same time. So we're talking about a big house, that this is because you can afford to have a lot of servants. You don't have to do a whole lot of work. So back to Oliver. By 1873, he had developed the Winchester rifle, and this becomes known as the gun that won the West. In a little over 40 years, they sold more than 700,000 rifles. That works out to be about 70 a day. These were the guns that were used by Annie Oakley, by Buffalo Bill Cody, even Theodore Roosevelt. When this gun first went on the market, it could shoot 15 shots in 10 seconds. Later, it was up to 120 rounds a minute. Now, what you have to think about this, and I don't know how much any of you know about guns, is before this repeating rifle, when you wanted to fire a rifle, you took the rifle, you stuffed gunpowder in, you stuffed a bullet in, you ramrodded it down, packed it down, you then pulled the trigger, which set off a spark, which lit the bullet, or lit the gunpowder, so it sent the bullet out. The reason it's a rifle is different than a musket, because a musket has a smooth bore, a smooth barrel, and a rifle, there's a groove, and the bullet goes around and around and around and around and around, and it makes it go faster and further. It kind of spins it by centrifugal force. And with this Winchester repeating rifle, you know, if you think about, they say that a really good marksman could do, with a regular rifle, could do maybe 2 shots a minute. With the Winchester repeating, think about this, 15 shots in 10 seconds. Think about the damage that that could create on a battlefield. And although he tries to sell it to the US government isn't terribly interested, although individual military men do buy it. Oliver Winchester begins selling this all over the world. Mexico, Turkey, France, Central America. And in less than a year, he sold 500,000 guns to the Turks or the Ottoman Empire. So he is selling these guns all over the world and making a small fortune. Women and girls stuff the packets in, stuff the bullets into packets. By 1870, Winchester was the biggest employer in New Haven. They sell the shirt factory. The shirt factory is small peanuts. And Sarah and William, since they finished building this massive house, began to travel the world in the US as spokesmen for the gun company. We know that they went out to San Francisco, and they loved the trip west. They went out on the train, they traveled lots of different places. They had a wonderful time. But they also traveled through Europe. They went to Turkey, they went to Spain, they went to France, they went to Germany, all over Europe. And so things were going fairly well until we get to 1880 and 1881. So I call that the year of deaths. In 1880, in May of 1880, Sarah's mother dies. She had been ill for a long time, but Sarah had been very close to her mother. Then in December of 1880, Oliver Winchester, her father-in-law, dies very unexpectedly, leaving his estate 50% to his wife, Sarah's mother-in-law, and 50% to William, his son, Sarah's husband. But then in March of 1881, William dies, and he dies of tuberculosis. So Williams was the third death that she faced in less than a year. At that point, she had never had a house of her own. She lived either in her parents' house or her in-laws' house. She had never handled her own money. She is 42 years old, and she inherits half of the Winchester Rifle Company and a whole lot of money. Probably about $20 million cash, and that's not counting the rifle company, and income that would continue to come in. This is just, she becomes an incredibly wealthy widow in a very short period of time. One source says that she got $1,000 a day for the rest of her life, at least $1,000 a day. In today's money, that would be $25,000 to $26,000. And if you think about that, I'm sure there's people out there who waste money, but maybe for a day or two, I could spend $26,000 a day. But after about a week, I'd be running out of things to buy. So you got a lot of money. And what are you going to do? She's a 42-year-old widow, never been on her own. And we're not sure what she did at first. We do know that she traveled to Europe, because in the directory of inhabitants of New Haven, it says she was in Europe traveling. We don't know how long she was in Europe. We don't know where she traveled. A lot of spas in Europe, she may have been going for her health. She did have some health issues. So we don't really know. But we do know that she's going to get out of town. She sets up a chest clinic at the Yale New Haven Hospital and takes the rest of her money and moves to California. It may have been, we don't know why she went. We know that she loved being in San Francisco when she traveled with her husband. We know that she had a sister who had already moved out here. Her sister's husband had gotten a job in the San Francisco area. So maybe she's coming to be near a sister. We also know that she has developed rheumatoid arthritis. And she may just have found the California climate a whole lot more pleasant than the climate, the damp, wet climate of New Haven. So she goes out. She buys land outside San Jose in the Santa Clara Valley. She also buys land in Atherton. Originally, she's thinking about building some sort of compound for all of her sisters and nieces and nephews eventually, but eventually she just buys them land in the area. They're close to each other, but not too close. What she buys in 1886, or 5 years after William died, she buys an 8-room farmhouse. Okay, this is the house that she buys. And that may be Sarah on the horse. We don't really know. So nice Victorian vernacular house. There's 46 acres. She's going to continue to buy land surrounding this property. She's going to make a ranch. She's going to be a rancher. But she also needs, this house isn't big enough. I mean, it's only 8 rooms. And so in 6 months, the house goes from 8 rooms to 26 rooms. That's about the same size as the house that she came from in New Haven, the Winchester house. And she's the designer. She's working with the carpenters and putting it all to work. And apparently she had such a good time that she just kept building and building and building. And when she got tired of building out, she started to build up. So you take off the roof, you add another story. And so within 14 years, the house has gone from this to this. There's the tower in the background. This is a 7-story tower. Now, she's not a trained architect. She draws a design, she draws a picture, and she says, I want you to build this, to the carpenter. And if they would build something and she didn't like it, she would have them tear it down and start over again. So this tower got built and torn down about 7 times before she was finally satisfied with it. And supposedly, from the rumor goes, from 1866, when she buys the land, to her death in 1922, there were 16 carpenters in shifts working around the clock, 7 days a week, building and rebuilding the house. Well, we also know that that's not true. She did not have people working around the clock. We also know that there were months that there were not people working. We do know that the workers were paid 2 to 3 times the going rate. And so they learned to live with these sketches that they gave her, that she gave them. And it might be on a napkin, it might be on a little scrap of paper. She said, I want an addition or a tower or a cupola or a room inside a room or a staircase. And it is true that what the carpenters built one day might be covered up or changed the next. In 1975, the workers who were doing some restoration in this building discovered a previously unknown room. Think about that. You know, didn't know it was there. Inside this little room were 2 chairs, a speaker for a phonograph machine, which dated from 1900, and the door had a lock which was made in 1910. There could, in fact, be other haunted, hidden rooms here. We really don't know. It's really hard to figure out where you are in this house. But here's a picture of the house, and we have a carriage here, and we think that this is a picture of Sarah in the carriage. We know that the man who drove her around always wore a top hat. At first it was in a carriage, but later he had a car, and you can see that the house is sort of grown like Topsy. There are a lot of things about this house that were unusual, but not just in the architecture. This house had both electricity and plumbing and gas light. And in the 1890s, less than 1% of the homes in the United States had electricity and plumbing. And her electricity, you could press a button and she had an electronic ignition to the gas lights. I mean, the lights were gas, but you pressed the button and the gas lights came on. Very new and unusual for the time. A lot of the things in the terms of the plumbing were really way ahead of their time. In 1906, we had the San Francisco earthquake, and this house was very badly damaged. And so we have this house, which is sort of growing and growing and growing with lots of things, lots of unusual sorts of things inside. But when the house is damaged in the earthquake, it seems like Sarah says, Sarah's had it. And she just says, make it safe, fill in the holes, make it safe. And she's not interested in finishing it. And so there's virtually no construction in the house after the San Francisco earthquake in 1906. There is repair, fill in the holes, but this may account for some of the oddities in the house. So here we have this house from the outside, which is very large. It's not totally unusual. There are several other what we call crazy quill houses in the United States, also built by wealthy widows who had very little to do with their time except to build a house. But there are odd things inside. There are 40 staircases. There are cabinets and doors that you open up and you just see a wall. There are rooms inside of rooms. There are chimneys that stop in an attic. They don't go through the roof. There are floors that have skylights. One room has 2 doors, a regular sized door and next to it a child sized door. But sometimes there's reasons why you can come up with that. So if you're taking your tour guide is going to point out that we have these spider web windows. Okay, cue the Halloween kind of spooky music. This is not totally unusual for the late Victorian period, but with Sarah, it becomes sort of odd. They are beautiful leaded glass windows. We have this door that goes to nowhere, but it very well might have been that there was some sort of balcony there before the earthquake. And remember, she says, we're not building anything, just make it safe. Well, you know, we're not going to build that balcony. We're not going to build that landing that you have there. We're just going to have the door. That's safe. Don't open the door. Here we have a case of a skylight in the floor. Now, we don't know why. It does bring light into the floor below. We do know that she frequently would build a story on top of a story. Was this an actual skylight? And then she built another floor up above. We do know that it is in a broad open area, and it does, with this skylight, you do have the light that comes from down below. This is a kind of solarium floor. They're going to talk to you about the number 13, that there are 13 bathrooms, and some windows have 13 panes of glass, and there are 13 steps on a lot of the staircases. Well, if you Google staircases, Google will tell you that frequently there are 13 steps in a flight of stairs. 12 to 13 is normal. And you can see she really used the best of everything in the building of this building. And here's the staircase that does. It goes nowhere. But remember, there was the earthquake, and maybe this staircase did go someplace. We lost, you know, that tower, which was 7 stories, that got lost. So there may have been something that was up here, and they just roofed it over and said no more. They always will talk to you about this very odd staircase, and it's hard to take a picture of it. This is looking at it going down, you'll see it's very narrow. This is a better view of it going up, and notice that the treads of this staircase, again, it's very narrow, and the step is not very high. This is a woman, however, who's 4'10", and she has rheumatoid arthritis. Steps would be very difficult. So maybe she has a staircase created where you only have to lift your foot 3 inches, and it's narrow, so you've got something to hold on to on both sides. Maybe this may not be something that's unusual. It might just be practical. There are windows that lead to another room. This is a piece of art glass. We tend to call it Tiffany, although we know that not all of it was made by Tiffany. Tiffany glass has become kind of generic, like Kleenex and saran wrap. On the other side of this wall is a room. But I don't know, this would be, I kind of think would be interesting in your house to have, you know, no one can see in, and you have a skylight here, so you have light coming in, and you'd have this nice light coming in from the stained glass window. Might be kind of interesting. One of her favorite rooms was the ballroom, and there are 2 of them. The parquet floors are teak, maple, ash, mahogany, and rosewood. The moldings are carved. The chandeliers were brought in from Germany. And one of the interesting things about this ballroom is that there is a wall that can move, and I'll talk more about that wall later on. There's another view. They always come up with really kind of spooky pictures. we have the fireplace, and on either side of the fireplace are stained glass windows. And there's a quote on them, wide unclasp the tables of their thoughts, these same thoughts people this little world. This is from Shakespeare. It's from Richard II. It's in a soliloquy when he is talking about being alone and facing death. And of course, people are going to read into this and just say, this is really weird. She's worried about the ghost and she's terrified. The explanation you're going to get in here is that she built this because of the death of her child and her husband's, and the ghosts of everyone killed by the Winchester rifle were haunting her. And so was she doing this building because the ghosts were making her, or was she doing this to confuse them? We really, that's up to the docents to kind of sell you on how mysterious this place is. This is her bedroom. There are a lot of bedrooms in the house. She did have servants, but mostly she lived here alone. Occasionally she had a niece living with her as a companion, particularly as she got older. So I'm not sure why she needs 40 bedrooms, but she has 40 bedrooms. And if you look at this house, I love the modern, fan there on the floor. But look at the detail of the ceiling and the parquet floors and the furniture. She imports furniture from all over the country. She has works of art from Europe, from India, from Russia. She is buying the best of everything and bringing it into the house. There's a sewing room because you always had to have a sewing room. You have to your clothes have to be made. This is one of the living rooms. There are a lot of them. Again, lots of detail, beautiful detail. Look at the floor, the parquet flat pattern on the floor, the fireplace surround, the detail on the walls, the ceiling. If you go on the tour, they're going to take you through this space where they have lots of pictures, but they also they have things stored. Because one of the things she did is when she saw an architectural detail that she liked, or she ordered an architectural detail to be made, she didn't always know where it was going to go. So they have storerooms of the excess pieces that she had made. The house itself is on the National Register of Historic Places, which will help preserve it. And architecturally, it is an amazing example of kind of a Queen Anne shingle style mix. And if you look at it just in terms of architectural detail and craftsmanship, it is really amazing. I love this sort of picture of the roof line, and you've got the greenhouses and the solariums and the finials and the uneven roof lines. This is so typical of this Victorian period of time. You have here this is a greenhouse area, and I'll show you another picture of it from the hallway. She developed a special watering system for this greenhouse because you'll notice that it's not on the ground floor. Water gets pumped up, the plants are watered, and then any excess water which gets down on the floor is drained away and taken away by pipes, and it is used to water the window boxes. And if there's still excess water, it then comes down into the gardens. And she not only was building the house, but she was building magnificent gardens around the house as well. So here's where you have this greenhouse. Here's where you have the skylight on the floor and the light coming down through. Again, you have the detail and the windows and the siding, the roof line, the fish scale roof. Now, there are places that you can see where the damage was from the earthquake, and you can see they just made it safe. You've lost plaster and lath off the wall. They've lost the plaster from the roof, from the walls. from the walls here. She says, just make it safe. And that's what they did. They didn't rebuild after the earthquake. And again, here's another example of, here's the room that was damaged by the earthquake and never repaired. You can see the ceiling damage. Beautiful fireplace. Lots of fireplaces, but no repair. Again, places that were not refinished, the stained glass managed to survive. She had more stained glass than she had windows to put them in. So she obviously had plans to use them, or maybe she was gonna, you know, I have a cousin who replaces her pillows on her couch for the seasons. Maybe she was gonna replace the windows for the seasons, I don't know. Beautiful examples of this art glass. Here's the elevator. On the upper floors, you can see this was originally an outside wall. And you know, why you have these high windows and you've got these funny little rooms and you know, it just, I'm gonna build this. This is the front door. And this is a masterpiece. This is a beautiful piece of wood carving, and the detail is absolutely amazing. But very few people came in because Sarah really becomes a recluse. Her family comes, but she doesn't do the social scene with the other women. And whether it is, you know, because of her rheumatoid arthritis and the pain that she was in, whether it was she just didn't care, we don't know. Look at this detail. This is fine craftsmanship at its best. Here we have a little door. And I mean, it looks strange. You walk out, well, there's nothing here to walk on. But again, was there something here when the earthquake, before the earthquake hit? But somebody spent a lot of time making this as beautiful as possible. So here we have the, you know, another view of all the different angles, and you know, it's a maze. The house is literally a maze. So she's a, she doesn't go out much. Her niece takes over more and more of the kind of contact with the world. Supposedly she ignored a couple of presidents. There's a report that Teddy Roosevelt came and banged on the door and she refused to let him in. We're not really sure that that happened because Teddy Roosevelt, before he became president, was a real supporter of the Winchester rifle. But when he became president, he went, oh, and they used him in their advertising. And when he became president, he said, no, I shouldn't be used in advertising. I thought, no, that's not a good thing. But the Winchesters refused to take it off. So we're not really sure. I mean, it makes a good story that, you know, can just sort of see Teddy Roosevelt marching up to the door, bang, 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 nobody will let him in. We're not really sure. That story may very well have been made up because a lot of stories were made up about Sarah Winchester. This is a picture of Sarah. And if we get a close-up of her face, you can see her face is, you know, she's moving into her old age. Her face is kind of swollen, whether this has to do with the arthritis, we don't really know, or whether, you know, some sort of medication they were giving her, we don't know. But she doesn't always stay at the house. She has other houses in the area, smaller houses, easier houses to get around. But she also has something called Sarah's Ark, which is a houseboat in San Francisco Bay. And the rumor is that she built this because she was afraid there was going to be a great flood. But the truth is, many wealthy people were having houseboats on San Francisco Bay. They were long before the houseboat craze in places like Seattle. There are dozens of houseboats in the harbor at this time. This one happens to have 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, a deck that goes all the way around. And I love the fact that we've got laundry out here on the line. She built this house mainly for her niece and her husband, but she does spend time here. She has 5 other homes in addition to Winchester House and the Ark. She buys 150 acres around where this houseboat is. She does like privacy, and eventually begins to sell some of it off, but she doesn't need to sell it off. Remember, she's got more money than she knows what to do with. She can't possibly spend it all. So before 1906, this is definitely her primary home. But after 1906, she probably spends more time in other places. Okay, whether it's she didn't want to just deal with the damage, whether we really don't know. But we do know that there's a lot of fake news about her. This came out in 1917, lying at the point of death, not true. The widow of the inventor of the repeating rifle, not true. Is dying alone at Lanata Villa. Well, she may have been at Lanata Villa, which is one of her homes, but she wasn't alone. But what is true is that the place was filled with rare objects of art from India and France. That's down here on this last line. And she was 78 years old. And she told her few friends that she received a message from the spirit world warning her that all would be well so long as the sound of hammers did not cease in the house or on the grounds. Okay, by 1917, that is the rumor that's going around. She had a lot of contact with the outside world. She may not have had contact with her neighbors, but she had contact with the outside world. She shopped by mail from B. Altman's. B. Altman's was a pretty posh department store in New York City. She subscribed to Architectural Review. She subscribed to Vogue. She got newspapers from New Haven, all the newspapers from New Haven. She also got New York newspapers, San Francisco newspapers. She knew what was going on in the world. She might not have been out in the world, but she knew what was happening in the world. She gets a reputation as a miser. Well, you can just imagine, she's a pretty wealthy lady, and she's constantly being asked for money. And when her name is associated with the money, it's a pretty small amount, $30, $50. But she gave over $1 million to the New Haven Hospital on the ground that they not use her name. She gave a large sum of money to save the redwoods, but don't use my name. She frequently would funnel money through other people. Other people got the credit. She just didn't want to have money made, didn't really want to have her name associated with the gifts. She dies in September, on September 5th, 1922. She's taken in death. They're a little bit more accurate here. She never allowed the news of her many deeds to reach the world. Her death, however, has removed from a host of sufferers one of their truest friends. She gave a lot of money to hospitals, particularly TB hospitals. In her will, she gives money to all her employees. She had people working in all of the houses. She ran an active ranch. She had fruit trees. She was farming. I mean, she had lots of people working for her. She gave all of them a great deal of money. She founded within her will a TB annex to the Yale New Haven Hospital, and that money is still part of the Yale Medical School endowment. She gave lump sums of money to her nieces and nephews, and many of them received the houses they were living in. The rest of the land and property was to be sold off, and the money split up and given off to charity. I think the thing that sort of kind of hurts me the most when I read about her death is on her death certificate, it lists her occupation as housewife. And you go, you know, this is a woman who was married for a very short period of her life. for all intents and purposes. She was married for less than 20 years. She lived more of her life without her husband. She never lived in a home that was her own till after she was no longer married. And it just says something about women in the 19th century. Her body was moved back to Connecticut, and she is buried in the same grave with her husband and with her daughter. So they go to sell things. Problem is, nobody really wants to buy Winchester House. I mean, who wants to buy a house with 160 rooms? It's in the 1920s. Yeah, there's money, but nobody wants a 160 room house. And so in order to make do, they sell off everything else, divide up the money, and they lease the house. And the house gets leased to an amusement company. And that amusement company is going to make money off of it, and they're going to turn it into the Winchester Mystery House. And this is how they sell it. And when you look at this, you go, well, these aren't mysteries. These are really good things. Laundry tubs having washboards and a soap tray molded into the porcelain tubs. Oh, wow. That was ahead of her time. Gas lights that can be turned on and off or lighted by pressing a button. Yeah, electronic ignition for the gas lights. Shutters that can be opened or closed by turning a crank. Oh, wow. You know, this is a mystery? No, this isn't a mystery. This was something that she and her carpenters had come away with. Chandelier with 13 lights. Well, that's kind of interesting because we do have the chandelier. It was imported. There are 12 arms that are identical and evenly spaced. And then there's one arm which doesn't match, which kind of is stuck in between some things. It looks like it was phonied up. Mysterious things, marvelous and beautiful things, work of art, high grade finishes. And what was interesting was that every year, as they open the house up to visitors, there's more and more mysterious things about it. Interesting. They invite Harry Houdini to come and spend a night in the house because Houdini was the big thing. So today, Winchester Mystery House, you can get your guided tour. It's beautiful. They sort of are straddling the boundary between this is a beautiful house architecturally and this is a house with somebody built because of ghosts. They do lots of Halloween spooky tours, nighttime tours. They are developing using the gardens for special events, for weddings and things like that. But I end up having lots of questions about Sarah. I know that I believe that Sarah was very bright. I believe if Sarah lived at a different time, maybe in our time, I think about her interest in math and science. Would she have been an architect? Would she have studied so she would know how to design something? Would she have had a career? This is a woman who, you know, in the 1880s, if you were a widow, you were expected to just, and you had no children, you were just expected to sit around and drink tea and gossip. I don't think she wanted to sit around and drink tea and gossip. I mean, she's not a party person. Maybe she would have been if her health had been different, but her health wasn't. And I told you about the wall in the ballroom. There's a wall in the ballroom that if you press on it, it moves. And inside it's a little room. And in that room was a safe. And it was a huge safe. And it special foundation underneath it because it was so heavy. And so, of course, what's in this safe? This safe belongs to one of the wealthiest women that ever lived in the area. So there has to be something important in the safe. You might remember Geraldo when opening the vault, Al Capone's vault. They did open it. And what they found in it was her husband's death certificate, her daughter's death certificate, and an envelope with a lock of her daughter's hair. they were the things she wanted to protect the most. And they were the things she didn't have. So I really think that the mystery has been created by those who own the house in an effort to create a tourist attraction. I have not seen it. I think I would go just for the architecture, and I probably would turn off anything that had to do with the ghost. I think Sarah was just plain bored, and she had the money, so let me try something new, and let me see what's, let me see what I can do. Can I add a new turret? Can I add a new cupola? Can I buy? And if she had lived later, maybe she could have done something else with her life. Anyway, so that is the Winchester House.
Kathleen,
Yeah.
what happened to the Winchester company? Who was running it while she moved to California?
They hire people to run it. She is still, she and her mother-in-law get the income from it, but there becomes a board. And it stays. I was doing a little bit of reading about the company. Well into the 20th century, it is very much a family-run business in sense of they treat employees like family. But
So is it still in New Haven?
yes.
Okay.
And Colt was in Hartford. The gun manufacturing came from Connecticut. That's where Eli Whitney, okay, if you really want to blame somebody for troubles in life, you blame Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney, y'all learned with the cotton gin, which made the cleaning of cotton possible. If it hadn't been for the cotton gin, slavery probably would have died off naturally because it was just too hard to clean the cotton here. So he invented the cotton gin, which made the cleaning of the cotton better. But he also invented interchangeable parts. And the first thing he made with interchangeable parts were guns. And he did that in a factory in Connecticut. So Connecticut becomes the sort of, this is where we make our guns.
Kathleen, a lot of the things that you say that are kind of the myths are the things that I remember hearing when I went through the Winchester Mystery House. It is a fantastic piece of architecture. And a lot of the things that they tell you on the tour is that she was told to keep building because that would keep her alive. That's one of the things that they told us. And you're right, they didn't build 24/7. There were lots of times that it wasn't happening. And there are some very amazing things in there, like the pictures you showed of the stairways that go nowhere. The grounds are beautiful. It is open again for tours. When you go on the tour, they do take you on the tiny steps, which is a very, very unusual feeling to be going up those little tiny steps because your mind is so used to normal sized steps. And they make sure that there's someone at the head of the tour who's giving the talk and someone at the end of the tour to make sure that nobody wanders down a hallway that they can't find them for quite some time because you can get lost. Another one of the myths that they said, and they do say that they are myths, was that she slept in a different bedroom every night so that the ghosts couldn't find her. There is a bathroom that has a window in it so that when she was normally in there, her nurse could look in on her to make sure she was okay. So having a window into a bathroom is kind of interesting.
You know, that actually, I hate to say it, but it does make sense in some ways. If you have health issues, bathrooms are dangerous places. People fall there. People can get hurt there. So yeah, somebody looking in, and if the nurse is already there taking care of you, well, makes sense.
It's a beautiful place to visit. It is a fairly long tour because there's so much to see. But when we went, it was very enjoyable. I don't even remember how much we paid. This was back in the 70s. but it's a beautiful place. The detail is just amazing, and you can just about see it in all those lovely pictures that you had.
It is, I mean, architecturally, I love Victorian architecture. I don't want it dusted, but I love it. I mean, it's beautiful. And you can see why people would try to come up with an explanation as to why somebody would do this. I mean, this is, in some ways, it's not logical. I mean, who builds a 160-room house, which is in fact a maze? I mean, and they, you know, they still, I mean, I think staff gets lost there at times. But you know, I also think this is a woman who has nothing to do. She literally has nothing to do. She's got more money than she knows what to do with. And, you know, think about, you know, if you had all the money in the world and in this sort of pandemic, and, you know, think about what you could spend money on. You know, I can have people come in and you know, redo my house and put in a hot tub, and, you know, and it just keeps going and going and going. And so I really do think there's a sadness to her story.
Yes.
You know, the loss of her daughter, that has got to be heartbreaking. To have a child die and be told, she was told that her daughter was starving to death and there was nothing they could do.
That would be so guilt-wracking.
Yes.
To think that, you know, you're trying to feed your child, and anyway.
Yeah. And although, you know, and I did check this out, there are people who said that she came from a from a tradition where unbaptized children, Annie was not baptized. Unbaptized children would go to hell. They couldn't go to heaven. I checked out the beliefs of the church that her family went to, and that is not a belief that she was raised with. But I'm sure that was out there, that sort of idea. You know, there's certainly a lot of guilt involved in all of that. And if her husband, you know, and again, if you think back, one of the best, she had a couple of good times with her husband. One when they were traveling, and the second when they were planning that house. So, you know, and it's very clear that she and William were a love match. And so if she physically is having difficulty traveling, you know, well, what does she do that brings her happiness? Well, she and William were happy when they were planning a house. So I'm going to plan a house. I'm going to imagine William is with me. So there's the parsonage behind Tony.
Thank you, Kathleen. This was,
Thank you,
this was
Kathleen.
really interesting.
It was really good.
Yeah, so I knew Lynn had been there, and I knew she could add some things to this. If I ever got to California, it's a place I'd like to see.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think I've seen some pictures of the gardens, and they really do seem to be making more of an effort now of getting people in for weddings and parties in the gardens. It'd be an interesting backdrop to a wedding.
It is still a privately owned for-profit.
And it's owned by the people, the family that leased it originally. They made so much money. They had been building amusement parks. They made so much money from this house that they were able to buy it. So it has really been owned by two people, by Sarah and by this, you know, family that has turned it into the mystery house. And of course, the more mysteries they can find, the better it is for them.
So are we on for next week?
I'm ready for next week.
Okay.
Yay.
We're going to India, and we're going to talk about a love story in stone.